What is life really like in South Korea? In today's video, you are going to experience an emotional and interesting story about a young traveler who moves to Korea alone and slowly discovers a completely new life. Through this story, you will learn about Korean culture, daily life in Seoul, Korean food, friendships, beautiful places, and the emotional experience of living alone in another country. This video is written in simple and easy English, so you can relax, enjoy the story, and improve your English listening at the same time. You will feel the excitement of arriving in Korea for the first time, the loneliness of being far from home, and the beautiful moments that slowly change a person's life. So sit back, relax, and enter the beautiful world of Korea. And now, let the story begin. When Daniel left his home country for Korea, he thought it would only be a short adventure. He planned to stay for 3 months. Just 3 months. He wanted to explore Seoul, eat Korean food, take beautiful pictures, and maybe learn something new about life. But he did not know that Korea would slowly change him completely. The people, the culture, the silence of the early mornings, the crowded subway stations, the tiny coffee shops hidden between busy streets, and the loneliness, especially the loneliness. This is the story of how one ordinary trip became the most important experience of his life. And maybe this story will change something inside you too. The airplane landed late at night. Daniel looked outside the window and saw thousands of lights shining across Seoul. The city looked endless. Modern buildings stretched across the dark sky, while moving cars created long rivers of light on the roads below. His heart beat faster. He felt excited, but also afraid. Everything around him was unfamiliar. The language, the signs, the people, even the air smelled different. After leaving the airport, Daniel stood quietly near the taxi area with his suitcase beside him. Cold wind touched his face. People moved quickly around him. Nobody looked lost. Nobody looked confused. Only him. For a moment, he wondered if coming to Korea was a mistake. But then he remembered why he came. Back home, his life had become repetitive. Every day felt exactly the same. Wake up, work, eat, sleep, repeat. His friends were busy building careers and relationships. Meanwhile, Daniel felt stuck. He wanted change. He wanted movement. He wanted to feel alive again. That was why he bought the ticket to Korea. Not because he had a perfect plan, but because he needed something different. The taxi driver helped him place his suitcase in the trunk. As the car moved through Seoul, Daniel pressed his face lightly against the window. Bright convenience stores stood open even after midnight. Groups of friends laughed outside restaurants. Streetlights reflected beautifully on wet roads after the rain. The city felt awake, alive, different from anything he had known before. And suddenly, despite his fear, he smiled. Daniel rented a small apartment in Seoul. Very small. The room contained 1 bed, 1 tiny kitchen, 1 desk, and a small bathroom. At first, he felt disappointed. The apartment looked much bigger in the online pictures. But slowly, he began to appreciate it. The room became his quiet little world in the middle of a giant city. Every morning, sunlight entered through the small window beside his bed. He could hear distant traffic outside. Sometimes he heard people talking in the hallway. Sometimes he smelled fresh food from nearby apartments. Everything felt new, but also lonely. At night, the loneliness became stronger. Daniel often sat alone eating convenience store ramen while watching videos on his phone. Outside his window, Seoul continued moving. People met friends. Couples walked together. Restaurants stayed full. But Daniel remained alone in his tiny apartment. One night, while eating instant noodles, he suddenly realized something painful. He had never truly learned how to enjoy being alone. Back home, he always escaped loneliness with noise. Music, social media, television, work. But here in Korea, there were long moments of silence. And in that silence, Daniel began thinking deeply about his life for the first time in years. Near Daniel's apartment, there was a small convenience store open 24 hours a day. He visited it almost every evening. The store became strangely important to him. The old man working there always smiled kindly. Even though they could barely communicate, the man greeted him warmly every time. Daniel slowly became familiar with Korean convenience store culture. He discovered triangle kimbap, spicy ramen, sweet milk drinks, cold rice meals, and strange but delicious snacks. One rainy evening, Daniel entered the store feeling tired after getting lost in the city. His shoes were wet. His jacket smelled like rain. The old store worker noticed immediately. Without saying much, he quietly handed Daniel a warm cup of instant coffee. Daniel looked surprised. The old man simply smiled. That small moment stayed in Daniel's heart for a long time, because sometimes kindness does not need perfect language. Sometimes people understand each other through simple human warmth. Daniel soon discovered that Seoul transformed completely at night. The city became brighter, louder, more emotional. One Friday evening, he walked alone through Hongdae. Music filled the streets. Young performers danced under colorful lights. Couples held hands while sharing street food. Friends laughed loudly outside bars and restaurants. Everything felt energetic. Daniel sat quietly near a small food stand and watched the crowd. For the first time in months, he forgot about stress, forgot about his old routine, forgot about the pressure waiting back home. In that moment, he simply existed. A young street musician nearby began singing softly. Daniel could not understand the lyrics, but somehow, the emotion still reached him. That was another thing Korea taught him. You do not always need to understand every word to feel something deeply. Not everything in Korea was magical. Some days were difficult, very difficult. Simple tasks became stressful. Ordering food, taking buses, reading instructions, even buying shampoo became confusing. One afternoon, Daniel accidentally entered the wrong subway line and traveled nearly an hour away from his destination. He felt exhausted, lost, embarrassed. Surrounded by signs he could not fully read, he suddenly felt completely alone. For a moment, panic filled his chest. But then a university student noticed him struggling. She politely asked if he needed help. Her English was not perfect. Daniel's Korean was terrible. Yet together, they solved the problem. After helping him, she smiled and said something Daniel never forgot. Getting lost is part of learning a new place. That sentence stayed with him. Because maybe she was talking about more than just directions. Maybe life itself is like that. Sometimes people feel lost before they finally discover where they belong. Every morning, Daniel visited the same small cafe near his apartment. The cafe was warm and peaceful. Soft music played quietly. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air. And every morning, the same girl worked behind the counter. Her name was Mina. At first, they only exchanged polite smiles. Nothing more. But over time, small conversations slowly began. Very small conversations. She asked where he was from. He asked which drink she recommended. Sometimes they laughed at language mistakes. Sometimes there were awkward silences. But strangely, Daniel looked forward to seeing her every day. One snowy morning, the cafe was almost empty. Mina brought his coffee to the table instead of calling his number. Then she sat across from him for a moment. Outside, snow covered the streets of Seoul. Inside, warm light filled the cafe. And for the first time since arriving in Korea, Daniel did not feel lonely anymore. Winter arrived quickly. The cold became intense. Daniel had never experienced weather like this before. His hands froze while walking outside. His breath became visible in the air. People wore long black coats while moving quickly through icy streets. Yet winter in Seoul also felt beautiful. Snow quietly covered rooftops and trees. Coffee shops became warmer and more comforting. Street food smelled even better in cold weather. Daniel especially loved walking beside the Han River during winter evenings. The city lights reflected beautifully on the dark water. Everything felt peaceful. One evening, while walking alone, Daniel realized something surprising. He no longer wanted to escape silence. In fact, he had started enjoying it. Korea changed the way he experienced time. Back home, he constantly rushed. But here, he slowly learned how to notice small moments. Warm coffee, snow falling quietly, music from distant streets, sunlight entering cafes, laughter inside restaurants. Life was still imperfect, but now, Daniel finally paid attention to it. Even after several months, Daniel still sometimes felt like an outsider. He noticed people staring occasionally. Sometimes conversations stopped when he entered places. Sometimes he felt invisible. Other times too visible. Living in another country taught him something difficult. No matter how long you stay somewhere, there are moments when you still feel different. And that feeling can become exhausting. One evening, Daniel sat alone in his apartment feeling emotionally drained. He missed home. He missed familiar language. He missed effortless communication. For the first time since arriving in Korea, he considered going back early. Maybe this experience was too difficult. Maybe he did not belong here after all. But then he looked around his tiny apartment. The room no longer felt foreign. The city outside no longer felt frightening. Somehow, Korea had slowly become part of him. And Daniel realized something important. Growth often feels uncomfortable. People rarely become stronger while remaining comfortable. Sometimes becoming a new version of yourself requires loneliness, confusion, and uncertainty. And maybe that was exactly what he needed. Spring arrived. Cherry blossoms covered the streets. Seoul suddenly looked softer and brighter. One weekend, Mina invited Daniel to attend a spring festival with her friends. At first, he felt nervous. Meeting new people still made him anxious. But he accepted. The festival was beautiful. Food stands lined the streets. Traditional performances filled the air with music. Children laughed while running under cherry blossom trees. Mina introduced Daniel to her friends. At first, conversations felt awkward. But slowly, everyone relaxed. They shared food, took pictures, laughed together. And during that evening, Daniel experienced something he had not felt in years. Belonging. Not complete belonging, but enough. Enough to warm his heart. Enough to remind him that human connection is possible anywhere in the world. Months passed. Without realizing it, Daniel began changing. He became calmer, more patient, more observant. He stopped checking his phone constantly. He started enjoying walks without destination. He learned how to sit quietly without feeling uncomfortable. Even his thinking changed. Back home, he measured success through productivity. But Korea taught him another way of living. Small moments mattered too. Rest mattered. Peace mattered. Human connection mattered. One evening, Daniel stood on a rooftop overlooking Seoul's endless lights. Wind moved softly through the cold night air. The city stretched endlessly before him. And suddenly he understood something clearly. He had not traveled to Korea to escape his old life. He traveled here to discover himself. And somehow, he finally had. When Daniel first arrived in Korea, he thought he was only visiting another country. But in reality, he was entering a completely new chapter of life. Korea gave him memories, friendships, loneliness, growth, and a deeper understanding of himself. Sometimes the most important journeys are not about destinations. They're about transformation, about becoming someone